So it's another gloomy day here in the UK, but I've had the Tesla Powerwall 2 installed, and I thought I would do a video to talk a little bit about how the install kind of goes, how things all set up, because that's something that I was interested in but couldn't really find too much online about. So that's what we're going to cover in this video, and we'll have a separate video about the Powerwall 2 itself and kind of how it works and how it's functioning. Okay, so we're starting off outside, so please excuse any background noise. The robot mower's busy doing its thing. So to bring you guys up to speed, in case you're not familiar with what the Powerwall is, so you're probably all familiar with Tesla, I guess the car company, but they really are more than just a car company. They also produce batteries and other things. And originally they brought out the Tesla Powerwall 1, and this was a 6.4 kilowatt battery storage system that was DC, so basically kind of zero loss, especially if you're using it with a solar system. You could kind of just charge directly from the solar system into there. However, that can sometimes cause some problems, especially around different countries. So the Powerwall 2 is an upgraded version which has 13.5 kilowatt battery storage, but it is using AC, so there is a little bit of loss. So you lose about 10% efficiency between the AC and DC, but it makes it a lot more versatile and easy to install. So what we're going to be covering in this video is the Tesla Powerwall 2. So in the UK, that costs around £6,000 plus fitting and any additional electrical work you might need. So you might need to have a updated consumer unit or what have you. And that price would include 20% value-added tax. However, if you have the battery installed as part of a solar system like I have, then you benefit from that reduced tax. So it's only cost you 5% tax. So it's definitely something worth considering if you're going solar to have battery storage. Obviously, I've gone with the Tesla because for my needs, 13.5 kilowatts kind of covers things, and I think based on my research the Tesla Powerwall represents the best value for money for that size of battery. If you need something smaller, there's other battery alternatives that are much more viable, but obviously right now we're talking about the Tesla Powerwall and specifically about the install. So a few things to note: you can have up to 10 Powerwalls stacked or daisy chained together, so that's really handy. They can be installed inside or out, and they're pretty robust. They are weatherproof. They're kind of cold to the touch. They are water cooled, and they have a 10-year warranty. And as we go through the kind of install process, I'll show you that it has the ability to connect to your network wirelessly or via Ethernet. Also has a cellular backup connection, which I wasn't aware of, which is kind of cool. And based on the UK specification, depending if you have DNO sign-off or not, it has the ability to supply a 3.68 kilowatt or a 5 kilowatt power supply out of the battery using its onboard inverter. And in terms of size of the unit, it's pretty big and it's pretty heavy. So it weighs 125 kilograms, which is around 276 pounds, I think. And in terms of size, it's 1118 millimeters high. It is 737 millimeters wide and 140 millimeters deep. So that's kind of how things stack up size wise. Now in terms of how things are going to be installed, so you can have this installed independent. You do not need to have solar. You can just have this as a battery backup solution. Now there's a couple of things to keep in mind here. In the UK we have something called the Economy 7 tariff, which means within a kind of a 4-hour time window early in the morning typically you have a reduced rate of electricity. So there is a version of firmware for the Powerwall that you can have, so you can charge up the Powerwall overnight, so then you can use that electricity that you bought at a cheaper rate during the day. So that's one reason why people may decide to go with this with a non-solar solution. Also, there is a gateway, which we're going to a bit more detail, but if you want to use this as a fully backup solution as well, you can get a backup gateway. There's also additional costs in terms of that, and also having your power isolated. So in the event of a power outage, your Powerwall can then supply power to your house as backup. That seems to be less common here in the UK, and not something I've gone for. We don't really tend to have too much in the way of power outages, but just to make you guys aware of that. So in terms of having it connected, we'll show you kind of how it mounts on the wall, how it does the measuring, how it does the communication, and all that. So we'll start off by just looking at the first CT clamp, which is located in the electric cupboard. Okay, so you can see here, this first black one here is the CT clamp for the Tesla, and this is measuring the grid supply. As you'll see from other videos, it's obviously got solar, there's a few things going on here. So this is the Tesla one, this is the Solar Edge one, this is my energy one, and this is the Owl one. But this is all you're going to have, and that's basically on the live connection from the grid. Now we'll pop into the garage to kind of show you the install in a bit more detail. And if you haven't seen the other videos, basically that CT clamp is flowing, or it's connected via one of these Cat6 cables that runs all the way along back into the gateway for the Tesla. Depending on the location of your grid supply and your consumer unit and all that, you may have to have a meter extension kit. It's not quite clear to me how that isn't actually working. There was some possibility I was going to need to have that installed, so I could have told you more about it, but in the end it wasn't required. So let's pop into the garage and take a look at how things look right now, and kind of then how things went in terms of install. Okay, so here it is all installed. As we go through this, I do a couple of overlay pictures to show you kind of what things look like, but I'll start off with kind of some of the fundamentals of how all this fits together. So up here I have an additional consumer unit that's been installed just for the solar solution. So if you look here, we have one breaker for the Tesla Powerwall, and we have one breaker for the gateway. Now in here, where we have obviously the live cable, which is this big black chunky one at the top there, we have the other CT clamp around the that black live cable, and that basically enables us to measure a couple of things. Obviously we have knowledge about how much power the solar is generating, and then how much power the Powerwall is feeding back into the house. So we have a couple of things obviously for safety. So we've got those two breakers so that we can isolate the battery and the gateway here, and we also have this other kind of breaker to isolate the Powerwall from the consumer unit as well. So obviously if any work's been done, this is how we can isolate it. Then we have the gateway. So there's a few things going on here. We'll open it up in a second. This is basically a weatherproof box that Tesla supply that has the gateway module in it and the Wi-Fi module that you plug in as well. Obviously if you're storing this outside, you can put a padlock on there to stop any tampering. If you pop this open, then we can have a little look inside so you can see what's involved. Okay, so obviously you're going to get an electrician to do all this wiring. Here we have the Neuro wireless module. So that enables wireless communication to your network to be able to provide details back to Tesla and up into the cloud. If you look in here, not quite sure how easy it's going to be for you guys to see, just about here there is an Ethernet port as well. And so basically what's happening here, we've got the CT clamps that connect into this module here, and also then all the electrical wiring into the power module here. The auxiliary modules aren't used. I'm assuming if you have the backup gateway, it's somehow communicates into here, and then we have the comms connections. So we won't mess with any of this. Obviously, really, you should turn off the power before opening that box. Okay, so then in terms of the UK and variants from the US, so in the US there is a cable that has basically two cables in one, but we don't have that in the UK. So you can see coming out of the Powerwall, we have a couple of things. One is the large chunky power cable which goes into the consumer unit, and then we have the I guess the white, I don't know really what you, I'm not an electrician, but it's like a single phase electric power. There's two of those. One is to kind of power the gateway, or the the communication in from the gateway to the Powerwall, and obviously the other one is for powering the gateway as well, is my understanding. You can see how these kind of flow through and in to the side, and then all the way up there into the consumer unit. So if we look at the Powerwall itself, just to understand a little bit about how it works. So basically we've got a couple of things inside the Powerwall. It's completely maintenance free, and there is basically liquid cooling going on to keep the batteries at the right temperature during charging and discharging, and there's some airflow that enables that to happen. So air flows in through the top here, along here, and then out the other side. So it's important to keep those vents free to allow some airflow to go between the two. And on this side is obviously where the wire's going. It's all the wireless, not the wireless, the power modules, everything. And on this side is where that 5 kilowatt inverter sits. So all nicely packaged in one. And then everything pretty much from this line below is the battery storage. In terms of kind of options, there's not really too much to see. On the side here we have an on and off button, and then we have the green light. That does a couple of things. It will be on constantly to show connection to the grid. It's obviously, or to the gateway. It will be off if there's no power to it. And when it's charging or discharging, so right now it's not doing either of those because the weather's pretty poor, this green light will slowly pulse green. If it flashes green, that means there's no connection to the gateway, which is kind of what it's like in the standard mode when you first do the installation. It's not connected up properly. So that's kind of pretty much things in terms of the unit itself. So we'll see what you can see in a moment. If I move this down, you can see I have this mounted slightly off of the ground just because I have some cabling underneath. So this can be wall mounted, as you see here, or floor mounted. Basically it comes with a large bracket, and we do a couple of overlays here. So I had the installer put some wood on the wall, which you might be able to see here if we look down. So because this is plasterboard then brick on the other side, that wood is doing a couple of things. One is it's allowing some more support of the mounting onto the wall. Also it provides a little bit of clearance so it can clear over the skirting board here and not interfere with the cables, but all seem to work really well. So you need a few people to help with the install, and really you want a adjustable dolly so you can lift and raise and put this onto the wall. Now we go upstairs and talk about kind of the computery side of things. So when it comes to the Powerwall, once the hardware has been installed here, then is to configure everything and have it talking to each other, talking to your network, and talking to Tesla, and then configuring it to work in combination with either the solar system you have or the grid connection you have and what permissions you do or not have. So we'll flip upstairs onto the computer and show you a little bit about what happens in terms of the install to get you up and running. Okay, so obviously all of this is being done by your certified Tesla installation engineer, and they may or may not have an additional electrician with them or what have you. So I'm going to show you now basically what the installer is going to be doing. So once everything is connected up on your wall, the gateway is installed, all the wiring's done, then what needs to happen is we need to connect the gateway to your network. So this is either going to be done in two ways. So as mentioned before, you have that wired network connection and you have the wireless. So in my installation, we've gone for the wireless option. As I mentioned before, there is also a cellular connection. I wasn't aware that this was part of how the Tesla Powerwall was set up. That cellular connection basically means once the install has been completed, everything's configured, in the event that your network becomes unavailable or something, the Powerwall does have the ability then to still continue to provide information back to Tesla to provide statistics, allow them to push firmware updates. Other things can be kind of maintenance cycles. So a couple of things in terms of maintenance. Obviously the batteries may need to go through maintenance cycles depending on how much they've been charged or discharged. Also that cooling system can get bubbles in. So what they will do is kind of put it on a max pump cycle, which will kind of help get the air out of the system. So sometimes if your Powerwall makes a kind of knocking noise, it may be bubbles in the coolant system, which they will help get those out. I guess that's one thing to note. In general, the Powerwall is pretty silent. There is a small amount of electrical hum. However, depending on the rate of charge and discharge, then you will hear the water pump running and obviously the coolant system working. And I'll try and do a little overview or overlay video now to see if the microphone can pick that up. But anyway, if we look on the computer, I can show you a little bit of information in terms of kind of what happens for your install. So basically, depending on how familiar you are with, I guess, computers, wireless technology, etc., some of this may or may not be new to you. But basically, that the Tesla system with the gateway and everything has obviously that Wi-Fi module available, and when you have got everything powered up, you will see that the Tesla is transmitting its own ad hoc network for you to join. So there's that wireless module specifically, which is pulsing depending on the earlier firmware updates, and then you'll see something that's TEG, so and then a dash, and then the last 3 digits of the serial number for the gateway. So Tesla Edge Gateway or something, I guess that the TEG stands for. So basically what will happen is you will connect to the gateway. So the engineer will use a laptop or iPad or something like that to connect to that network. And then from there, they're going to start going through a few configuration options. So by default, they go to the local network that's being transmitted there, which is 192.168.91.1. And when they have connected to that, the first thing they're going to be prompted with is the current version of firmware that exists on the gateway. and it will prompt them to do a download to take them to the latest version. So mine was on version 1.7, and after the update it's taken it to version 1.21, so a big variance. So I'm assuming that the creation of the gateways is pretty easy, and it's the Powerwalls that take time to be shipped and delivered. Once that's been updated, it will kind of go through that process of doing the updates. It will then reboot the system a couple of times to obviously apply that firmware. Then it's going to ask the installer to basically start their work. So the installer will put in their installer email address, so that basically I think it provides the installer with information on the Powerwall, so they can provide that to Tesla. Then it will ask them for the password. They have this password in the manual, but it's also a slight variation of the serial number of the gateway. Once that's done, they will start basically going through various configuration settings. So one of the things they're going to be doing, obviously, is also setting up the customer information. So you may or may not have a Tesla account already. If you do have a Tesla account already, it's important that you give the installer the email address that your current Tesla account is registered with, so the Powerwall automatically gets associated with your account, so they can do the setup there. If not, if you don't have that already, then they will provide that information to you. So you'll get an email from Tesla saying, "Welcome to Tesla, congratulations on your Powerwall, please click here to download the app," and what have you. So right, so there are things that happen obviously partway through this process, and you'll see this on the screen as we get there. Basically, once the firmware has been updated, then the gateway is going to start looking for the Powerwall. So this can take a few minutes. Basically, it will scan through its connections, and ultimately at some point it will detect the Powerwall, and it will verify its connection to that. Once that's been completed, then you're going to start telling it a little bit more about the system that you have. So I think this is a combination of, so it can configure the right parameters in terms of the information it's reading, but also provides, I guess, some benchmarking information back to Tesla. So once the connection has been made, there's a few kind of things that happen in this process. So let me just double check on my screen where that is. Okay, right, so once the Powerwall is detected, they'll confirm obviously the serial number and everything. Then the next thing it's going to ask you is information about where you are. So the reason for this is to make sure that the Powerwall complies with local regulations. So if you've seen some of the other videos that I've done, I had a DNO application field, so I could have a system that was larger than 3.68 kilowatts and the ability to pump back into the grid. So in my scenario, obviously they're choosing the country, they choose the DNO, so the distribution network operator. Then they choose a standard. So in the UK, we've basically got two standards. We've got the G59, which limits you to the 3.68 kilowatts, or we have the G83, which is where the DNO has approved a number larger than that. And so basically the difference to us as a Powerwall owner is if we only the G59, so the G83 option is selected, we will be restrained to the 3.68 kilowatts. If we have the G59 selected, then we'll be able to get the maximum 5 kilowatts out. So it's important that your installer is verifying that you have the right DNO approvals, etc. to do that. So that's just something to keep in mind. So then you also set up where it's a single phase, 3-phase, etc. So single phase is most common here in the UK. Then you go through and set up the information related to the inverter you have. So obviously I have the solar edge here, and it tells you the inverter model, etc. And then also manually type in the size of the array. So obviously I have a 6 kilowatt inverter, but I have a 9 kilowatt array. So that information is also then fed into this system. Once that's all done, basically the process starts to go further a bit more. So it asks you for some of the meter information. So that's a little black Nero box that we showed you earlier in the gateway. That will verify communication to that metering device. Once that's all verified, then it asks you for the order of how the CT clamps are plugged in. So obviously your installer will, I think there's 4 clamps in there, and the installer will say this one is for the grid and this one is for the solar array, and that enables the gateway to understand and measure and communicate that information, obviously to decide whether the battery is charging or discharging, as well as allowing you to see this information on the app. Okay, so once that's completed, we continue to go through the install. They may at this stage ask you to help do some checks, so like boiler, kettle, turn a load of things on, turn a load of things off, just so they can see that the meter is verifying. I was there with them and also did some verification with my Solar Edge app to check that the solar and generation measurements were matching up to what the Solar Edge was seeing, to make sure that everything was configured properly. Then your installer will ask you if you have a preference of what they're going to call the gateway, or they may just decide that for you. I was asked, so I just called it Pearson Gateway. Then it'll just basically do some quick charge tests. So I think in this scenario it does do a little bit of pulling from the grid, because solar may not be an option, just to basically make sure that the Powerwall and the gateway are able to communicate pull power and push power appropriately. So those tests last around a minute. And once that's completed, you're pretty much done. So the installer then may help you configure your app to able to get the statistics, or they may just wait for you to get the email from Tesla so you can take care of it yourself. It depends, obviously, what your installer is doing for you. And it's at this stage that they will kind of probably populate all of your user information and customer information, and they may or may not give you a password. So if you don't get the password given by your installer, you can kind of reset this later. And basically this is handy, so when in the future when you log in to the Powerwall, you can do this in 2 ways. You can log into it through your browser by going to TEG dash and then the last 3 digits of your serial code, which your installer should give you, and that will enable you to log in with your email address that you provided to them and a separate password that's just for your kind of system locally. And this enables you to see that it's connected to the wireless network, and so if you get a new wireless router, you need to have the ability to be able to obviously to change those settings. That allows you to do that there. And this is also where the installer could then come back at a later date. You can change those passwords. So obviously I recommend change those because it's got background and security, but it's completely up to you. There's no mandated requirement to do that. And that's pretty much it. So once everything's installed and running, you'll then be able to see things running both in your browser and then set up the app, and we'll kind of cover some of those in a different video, but you can just see briefly on the screen kind of what my system looked like when it was first up and running. So that's pretty much it. I hope this video was kind of interesting. Kind of rushed through it a little bit because obviously I'm not a qualified installer. This is about me just trying to share what I observed and to give you guys some indication what's happening in the background if you're interested, or if you're thinking about having a Powerwall installed and you'd like to know kind of how all things fit together, might be useful to you. So we'll have another video talking about how the Powerwall is actually working, how it's operating, what I'm happy with, what I'm not happy with over the next week. And yeah, if you have any questions or any feedback or things you'd like to know about the Powerwall, please leave some comments below, and we'll try and share that information with you over time as we start living with this solar and Powerwall combination. Thanks for watching this video. A thumbs up would be really appreciated. If you're interested in other geek type videos, please consider subscribing to Spectrum Geeks. Why not also follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. And before you leave, why don't you check out one of these other videos that may be of interest. Thanks again for watching.